If you love Paul Harvey stories and the rest of the story, subscribe now.
The annals of warfare have been called many things, but here we shall refer to it as the Battle of Anacostia Flats. The major was actually second in command of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment and had been assigned to it not quite 3 weeks prior. However, he was the field commander that day, July 28th, when General Miles of the 16th Infantry Brigade ordered the troops to advance across the bridge. In 1 hour, the 3rd Cavalry rode out in a column 4 horses wide. Armored tanks followed about a mile behind. By 15 o'clock hours, they had reached the battlefield. The major rode farther ahead alone to make a reconnaissance of the terrain and an estimate of the situation. Briefly, he encountered enemy forces and then returned to the gap to prepare for battle. "We'll be using the gas grenades, men," he informed the assembled soldiers. The infantry put on their gas masks and drew their rifles from their slings. At 16:05, the cavalry bore down with the infantry close behind. They engaged the enemy, perhaps 10,000 of them. Not only were the American troops clearly outnumbered, but the infantry was lagging and the cavalry's flank had turned. Then the enemy line, shouting like ancient warriors in a savage battle cry, surged forward in full charge. Now the combat was suddenly hand-to-hand. Sabers and bayonets flashed in the afternoon sun. The major urged his cavalry forward, and the infantry rushed in to fill the gap. The enemy, numerous though they were, retreated. Nightfall came. The major paced before his subordinates. "If we wait until sunrise to resume the battle," he muttered, "the tide could turn against us." So instead they would attack again that night, cross the river, capture the enemy camp, and take Anacostia Flats. Orders were given. The United States Army moved up. The 3rd Cavalry formed to the north. The 16th Infantry marched southward along the river and then turned by the left flank to engage the enemy. Taken by surprise, many of the latter began burning their tents before taking up arms. The cavalry charged. The infantry began lobbing grenades. The tanks roared in, and by dawn's early light the enemy had been routed. The Battle of Anacostia Flats had been won. Or could there ever truly be a winner in such a confrontation? For the military engagement you've just relived, a violent encounter in which remarkably nobody died, did not take place in some distant jungle or amid the European hedgerows of long ago. It happened in an inner city, an American city. You see, in July of 1932, about 20,000 demonstrators marched on Washington, D.C. When their solitary demand was not met, about half of them went home. But the 10,000 or so who stayed, many of whom were believed by authorities to be ex-convicts and communists, threatened to become an ugly mob. That's when the United States Army, including cavalry and infantry under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, his second-in-command Colonel Dwight Eisenhower, and Field Commander of the 3rd Cavalry Major George Patton,